Felix Riebl and Ollie McGill from the Cat Empire. Welcome to Australian Musician.
Great to be here.
Love it.
Thanks.
You guys have got yet another album coming out on August 25. It's called Where Angels Fall. It's the first album of the new lineup of the Cat Empire. Was there a discussion beforehand about the kind of album you wanted this to be?
There was many discussions. There have been discussions between Ollie and myself since we were 13 years old and plotting bands. But this one in particular, because, it was a very significant moment, the decision that the two of us made, along with Ross and several other members who are continuing the journey with us. But the transition was a significant point in our lives after 20 years with that group. And the decision during COVID to say, no, we believe that this has a fantastic life to it and something we want to be old playing this music, and there's so much music to explore, was a big moment for us. And so I guess you can elaborate on this, but for me, the moment that rang true was just like, we've got to make this more Cat Empire than anything we've ever done. It has to overflow. Instead of thinking of just like for like replacements for musicians who have moved on, it was like, let's bring in a community of musicians. Let's start songs from really different places that we had in the past. Let's do things differently, but still keep the spirit of the band recognizable,
Yeah, we wanted to draw in, because we'd been on a huge journey with the other guys, and evolved and gotten to a certain point. But heading into the new band, we kind of wanted to go back to the vibe that we got on the debut album. And so we recorded this new album with Andy Baldwin, who produced that album, and really went for, a more ambitious, big sounding record than we have ever done.
Yeah. Felix, when last time I caught up with you about your solo album, you played me a bit of this Cat Empire album. You were very excited about it. And you were telling me about the extraordinary number of musicians on the album. How did it work? You had a song. How did you know to bring in African percussion for this particular song?
Well, a lot of that happened quite naturally. And with Andy Baldwin, who's a very excessive, life-loving engineer, Ross, who's an extraordinary arranger and one of our oldest friends, between the four of us, we're sort of like the creative brains trust of the album in a way. And instead of saying, okay, what's the the rhythm for this, or what are the parts exactly, we'd say, okay, well, this song needs a Brazilian percussion ensemble. That's its spirit, that's one of the songs I'm thinking of. It's called Be With You Again. It has to start from there. So we Neda Romani, who's playing percussion and dancing and singing in the new Cat Empire, and is a big personality in the band now, is incredibly connected there, and that's sort of her speciality. And so she brought in some incredible Brazilian percussionists, and we put that in as a bed first, and then the song sort of built from there. The same with Boom Boom, that West African percussion bass from that song. That was the beginning of it. So we had a rehearsal. We brought in some musicians from Aussie Kuma Beats who love that band, and they came in and we found a rhythm together, and that was the basis of that song that we built it around. A song like Owl on the album was very epic and flamenco, and instead of saying let's layer up some strings, or let's build a rhythm section first, it was more like, okay, we'll bring in a symphonic string section, I should say, and sort of just make it more. So everything was kind of excessive, but starting from those details of more. Overflow big, and I think I'm rambling a bit, but the Cat Empire has always evoked that in my life, and I think in the people who come to see us, this sense of occasion of like, oh, anything could happen, or this is not a sound you can so easily define. This is like, and we just tried to take that into excess, Brazilian street parade atmosphere kind of thing, and then into a symphonic flamenco thing, and then into this great West African, really, really kind of uplifting major song. Anyway, each song we treated as its own world with these really kind of dynamic characteristics. Yeah.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
You answer the next question.
The opening track, Thunder Rumbles, has a tuba, I believe. Is
Yeah.
it on it?
Sousaphone. It's
yeah.
pretty much the same instrument, just shaped differently, so that you can march down the street while you play it.
It's quite a statement to open the album. Was it always going to be the opening track?
No. Well, we didn't. We probably only decided the album order towards the end, really.
I think it was Ross. Ross is responsible for creating that song because, you know, we had a collection of songs, you know, more than enough to make an album. And then Ross came in and he's very discerning. And he said, I think we need like a really iconic Cat Empire moment. You know, there's a couple of songs that are missing on this in terms of an atmosphere. And that one became it. You know, after Ross came in and said, we need that, you know, pretty much that day we went to work and found those edges that we needed. And that song was born pretty much from that. And I spent time in New Orleans. Ollie's really into that sound. It sort of started from that place. Another thing I'd say around it is this: we talked a lot about this sort of contrast between sophistication musically and writing songs that were dumb. And I mean dumb as a good thing. As a good thing. It's just like, how can we simplify this to its really bare bones? And Thunder Rumbles is one of those dumb ones that is all about impact, you know. Yeah.
The title, Where Angels Fall, where does that fit in?
That's a lyric. That's a lyric from that song, actually.
Yeah, that's
I like the space between words where the angels fall, and you know, more significantly, Where the Angels Fall, that the album title came from a few things. One is Gigi's artwork. As we were making the album at the Marybeck City Band, which is a community hall with instruments from, you know, over 100 years ago. It's a community space where bands rehearse from, you know, many different levels of band, but it's a really kind of inclusive, interesting, genuinely musical Brunswick music hall. And Gigi, as we were doing the tracking and things like that in a studio that was still sort of getting built and wasn't a particularly typical studio in Melbourne at all. Gigi was doing artworks, and part of that was where people sort of floating in this sphere. You know, it had sort of for me, kind of a Renaissance-y feel to a psychedelic Renaissance sort of thing. And we were all, you know, after we do a take, the guest musicians or the musicians in the band would go out there and do a photo. You know, so it was one of those moments where the artwork and the kind of atmosphere, the visual atmosphere of the album was being created at the same time as the sonic atmosphere. So I think that one, because everyone was floating Where the Angels Fall, mixed with that lyric, was probably the thing that grabbed me. Yeah.
Ollie, there's some great piano intros to some of these songs. West Sun is one of them, a gospel flavored piano intro. What kind of piano was that recorded on?
Well, that was recorded on the piano that sits on the stage at Marybeck, where we, you know, the community hall Felix was just talking about. One of the interesting things was we were tracking, you know, like when you first start recording, we had bass and drums in one room, and we managed to get a mic lead out all the way to the piano, and you know, it's on it's
50 meters away.
Yeah, it was like 50 meters away. But we only had 16 channels to record to, so there was only one channel left for piano. And usually you would record piano with at least two mics, and you get a stereo sound, and it kind of is a typical piano sound. But for this one, we had to go mono, which for me was like, I was very on edge about it. I was like, oh, is it going to sound any good? But we had a particularly beautiful mic. It's a ribbon mic that we used, and we recorded the piano with just that one mic, and it just worked. It just sounded fantastic for those songs that we did it. We didn't do it with every song. There are a couple of songs recorded on this piano right behind us.
Stand here. This is my studio, and a lot of the album was sort of written here late at night, wasn't it? And some of the some of the takes would actually keep from the demo time and just say, "Oh, that sounds."
Yeah, there's some demo piano on there that made it to the record. There's a a few late nights after everyone had gone home, I'd come, because I sleep in this room when I'm down, so I'd just kind of stay up and do some extra parts, and that piano made it to a few. But West Sun was the mono piano sound from Merribeck, which was quite unique. It kind of gave it a bit old timey, and just sat in the mix really well because it wasn't as wide as other piano sounds, so it just kind of sits in a more narrow space, if that makes any sense to the listeners.
So what about the live shows? Are you just playing piano, or are you playing some synth sounds as well with this album?
I use two Nords. I don't know, being a musician's magazine, you might know what a Nord is. The Swedish piano company. And I've got a Nord Stage 3 and an Electro 4 that sits on top that mainly just does organ. The bottom one is a lot of piano. They just have a really good upright piano sound that I like using. But beyond that, starting to creep in a little bit more like synth sounds to layer to kind of create a bit of a wider sound on certain tracks. A few kind of like, you know, more kind of lead, you know, synth lead sounds and things just creeping in there. It's a slowly expanding kind of soundscape that we're working on.
Yeah. Is it a difficult album to translate to the live situation?
There are some real challenges, you know, mainly just not having enough hands. You know,
and trying pretty well though. With it's you got samples in your left hand and the sort of doubling the bass line. Then you got the Montuno in your right.
I managed to create a Montuno. Montuno's, I don't know if you know the Cuban style of piano playing, where it's usually like two hands in octaves playing a really percussive piano line. But when you're doing something in your left hand and you've only got one hand left, you know, how can you play a Montuno that sounds convincing? Well, I got two piano sounds, layered them on top of each other, one like up 2 octaves, and it gave me a really massive Montuno sound. And that was one way of dealing with, you know, how do I deal with not enough hands?
Sound for the new band though
it's always we're going for a bigger sound, so these challenges,
more percussionists, we've got samples, plus I'm playing Cuban trees in a lot of them too, so we sort of added instruments. And the Canepa used to be a famously non-guitar band, whereas now we've got the Trez in there. On the last tour we had, you know, our crew is also, they're all really handy guitarists as well. So the stage has been quite full with other musicians as well. I'm going off our Europe tour. Yeah. And so we've been able to, like, the 3 songs we've been doing live, which are our Rock and Roll and Thunder Rumbles, have all been real high points in the set. You know, I feel like we've been able to play everything really pretty accurately.
Yeah, well, it's with the extra chordal instruments on stage and just the more expansive sound. You know, there's a lot more. It calls for a lot more kind of crazy sounds. You know, sounds that don't sit in the usual space, and so you know, these challenges of trying to create new sounds and how to execute them on stage, they're presenting themselves more often at the moment, which is great. It's good fun. It's always a creative process trying to figure out how to get sounds from the album. And we absolutely refuse to use backing track. You know, it's just not something that we would ever do. And so it's always trying to figure out how to make 2 hands sound like 3, basically, or 4.
So what does it mean to the band to have a whole new album worth of songs potentially to add to the set list?
Well, I honestly think that this is hands down probably the most fun I've ever had making an album, and probably the most significant album in my life for a number of reasons. The transition of the band, time, the situation that I was in with my family, something about it. This album was a great moment for me, you know, an important moment. It was survival, and whether it was spoken or not, I mean, we talked about creating something that was big, you know, but for me, as a songwriter, I think that I really want to try and get to a place where my songs are singing themselves, where they're melodic, where they, and to bring that melodic aspect and let that be the thing that can fill up a big theater or fill up a festival kind of thing. And I feel like this album is the strongest writing that I've done in that sense. So I think that these songs, regardless of whether Ollie's, you know, covering parts or things like that, that doesn't really matter, because I think the songs on this album are all made to get onto a stage. There's not one song on this album I don't think would fly, and that's not the case, because in the past I felt like, oh, this is a great studio moment, but it probably won't translate, you know, that there's a thing that happens there. Whereas I feel like this album, wall to wall, from track 1 to 14 or whatever it is all big festival worthy, and it's the first time that we've, for mine, managed to do that with a whole album. And so I'm really excited about this one. I just think it's you know, it takes a while for fans to get to know it, so we can't play the whole album the first show kind of thing. But I think over the next few years, this album is probably the most thorough, melodic, festival, tough, rhythmic album that we've put together.
Yeah. You're touring September, October around Australia. Then what happens into 2024?
It's non-stop. I mean, the reason why we wanted to keep the band going was because there's so much musical scope in the Cat Empire. Like, you know, it's one of those bands that, because you can't really define the style, and because it's got really great musicians in it, we can do pretty much whatever we want. So we're touring this one in Australia and North America, finishing Mexico City. We'll tour this album in South America. We'll go to Asia, and we'll come back and play some festivals. We're already working on a new album. We've been rehearsing all day today with this really great kind of flamenco Afro-Cuban, kind of weird outback rock Australia combination of sounds that feels like it's in a world. Most likely we're going to play with orchestras after this tour and things like that, and just keep on being musically ambitious and curious. And one of the best things about getting older as musicians or having more experience is that you just value it so much more, and you enjoy the experience, and the better you get at playing, the more you realize you have to learn, and the more interesting it is to kind of open new things up. So it's a really creative time coming up, and we've got a good team now and wonderful musicians we're associated with, and we'll just keep on being as creative as we can, I think, and see where it takes us.
Yeah. Well, the album is Angels Fall. It's out August 25. It really is a fabulous album. And Ollie and Felix, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, Greg. Thanks, mate.